Welcome to Unicorn Roast. Hey, Emily, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good, Mike. How's it going?
It's going great. I'm in California, leaving for Sicily tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to that. But
Cool.
you've been doing a lot of writing. What have you been working on?
Yeah, I had a long week, a lot of DeepSeek, a lot of electric cars, a lot of other news, but mostly DeepSeek. So I definitely got a deep dive into it. If anyone, I don't know, if anyone's exhausted, it's just me. But at the end of this week, it's just a lot.
It's a deep seek week,
Yes.
and so that was kind of interesting. I thought because nobody was talking about deep seek, and then
Yep.
within the period of like 5 minutes, everybody was talking about deep seek, and there's a lot to talk about. So you wrote a really great piece about this, where you went in, you figured out all this stuff, you were using it, you were testing it, and on a high level, like what did you conclude about its capabilities, its usefulness in the real world?
Yeah, so I had an interesting experience with it. I actually saw an article about DeepSeek about maybe last week, and I sent it to my editor and I was like, hey, should we cover this? And it was like, nah, no one knows what that is. And then this week, over the weekend, it just complete explosion. And yeah, my reporting followed a pretty typical cycle of like, what is it? And then the testing, like you mentioned, and then how Microsoft and Amazon and Perplexity have already adopted it and integrated it into their models. So at a high level, it's very similar to other chatbots. It
Hmm.
actually, that's why OpenAI is mad about it because it probably trained on their model and its responses are extremely similar. So
Right.
it's just like this commodification almost of chatbot responses. They're all sucking up the same data and they're all dispensing it. And there are some differences in what's called the reasoning model that DeepSeek brings. But really, it's just cheaper. And it's cheaper for businesses. So it's exciting if you are a business and now you can basically have ChatGPT for way cheaper. And I mean, really a fraction of the cost.
And it's open source too, right? So anybody can use it
Hmm.
and modify it and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they say. I mean, Meta says its models are open source as well, and they don't meet the official definition of open source. There actually is one, which I was surprised to learn, and they are
Hmm.
mad that Meta is calling themselves open source because it doesn't meet the criteria. It's a lot is still locked down and still behind that walled garden. DeepSeek says it's open source. I should reach out to those people and see if they think it qualifies. But
Yeah.
yes, that's a
So
technicality.
so early on, like within the first few hours of this getting a lot of press attention, and by the way, it got a lot of press attention because Wall Street freaked out and started selling Nvidia and all these other AI stocks. And the basic reason was that, hey, if these things can be done on the cheap, we don't need hundreds of billions of dollars to keep investing in these companies. It can be done cheaply. And also, it sort of threw a monkey wrench into the confidence of the American lead in AI advancement, where you apparently have this very advanced Chinese company doing very advanced work very cheaply, basically something that requires fewer data centers, that can be used
Yep.
by everybody, like you said. And so they kind of panicked and sold all these stocks probably prematurely. Now, Mark Andreessen said, wow, this is the greatest thing ever. And then Ben Thompson said, well, it's probably on average more or less on par with the first version of ChatGPT. We're already on the third version of ChatGPT. So it actually is significantly behind. Do you have a
Huh.
sense of where it fits in terms of direct comparisons with ChatGPT?
I mean, the I asked both platforms the same question and they truly gave me such similar answers. So, I mean, I didn't test it for every field. I didn't test it for scientific research. I didn't try to diagnose cancer with it, but
Hmm.
as far as everyday users, it's just extremely similar. The big difference, which was really interesting, was when I asked about hot button political questions for that the Chinese government and CCP might not like. And so I asked, you know, is Taiwan an independent state?
Hmm.
And it gave a long answer originally that said, oh, it depends who you ask. China thinks this, the US thinks that, the international community thinks XYZ. And then it did something I have never seen ChatGPT do, which is it deleted the answer and said, sorry, I can't talk about that right now. And it did the same thing about the Uyghur Muslims that are, being detained, and there's a lot of allegations of forced labor, cultural education, quote unquote, trying to basically root out that ethnic minority. And there's a lot of, I don't know how deep we want to get on that, but basically everyone agrees they're doing that. I asked them
Yeah.
about that. It gave me a very deep answer that was exactly the same as ChatGPT, talking about, yeah, there's allegations of human rights abuses. This is this and this source. And then it deleted it again and said, sorry, I can't talk about that right now. And then at one point, it actually started using we pronouns, speaking as a CCP. And it was a
Wow.
crazy experience to see that firsthand.
Wow. So it's like you caught them midway through turning this thing into the mind and the voice of the Communist Party of China.
Yeah.
So, at first glance, it seems like people are monitoring your use and going in and sort of replacing the results, but it's probably a bot, because this is kind of how Chinese
Yeah.
social media works. If you go into any social media site and you say that Xi Jinping looks like Winnie the Pooh, you'll see your post for like a second, and then off it goes. And
That
then,
was it. Yeah.
yeah,
You've seen that before?
no, I haven't. I've read about it.
Yeah. I
And
was just sitting at my desk and it did that. And
yeah,
I was like, wait, the answer's gone. What happened?
yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of people are doing testing on the censorship part of it, and it'll often refuse to answer. It'll say something like, let's talk about something more constructive.
Yeah.
Or, it basically just gives you the full on party line of the Chinese government. Um, it apparently some early results, early testing, early analysis shows that they're doing keyword filtering, and they're also doing reinforcement learning. So it's actually learning
Yeah.
how to censor as we're using
Huh.
it. Now, this brings up a topic of my own that I wrote about, I think, like 3 or 4 days before the hoopla hit on this thing, which is that, I think we're entering into an era of politically biased chatbots, right? And after everybody's been talking about all the stuff we were just talking about, which is the Communist Party's use of DeepSeek as a censorship tool, it seems more obvious. But a few days before we were all talking about this, it didn't. But my basic perspective is that newspapers have always been kind of biased. If you're like a sort of a lefty kind of a person in the 50s and 60s, you kind of probably subscribe to like a lefty kind of newspaper, and vice versa. And then, but if you turn on the TV, there would be Walter Cronkite types who are giving you just the down the middle. They're trying to give you a down the middle sort of generic kind of Reuters type of view, where it's just like, we're detached from everything. We're not really on one side or the other. And so that existed for a while until 1980, when CNN came out. So you had cable news, which is news all day instead of just like the news hour once or twice a day. And CNN was sort of in the middle, maybe slightly to the left. And then when the right wing stations came in, they moved to the left. More left and more right cable news stations, shows, and so on came out. So that became politically
Yeah.
divisive, because people would choose the
Yeah.
perspective that they wanted. Then we had social networks. A few years ago, we had filter bubbles. Eli Pariser had a book of the same name, where he described this concept where you go into Twitter, you go into Facebook, and through your actions, you demonstrate that you're on the left or on the right, and it will give you more of what you want, which makes, on the surface, it makes the social network more appealing to you, because it's sort
Hmm.
of agreeing with your worldview. And then there was controversy about that, controversy about whether Google search was a kind of filter bubble of its own. And then
Well,
we had the
any
phenomenon,
information dispensing, like these are all just new
right?
formats of dispensing information. And so you're right that a chatbot is just the new iteration of that.
Right. But what happened was interesting on the social networks is, instead of a filter bubble, what happened is we got all these new sort of like deliberately biased social networks like Parler and Gab on the right,
Right.
and some of the other ones that came out on the left. And people started choosing. Well, this is in the last 6 months, a year, basically since Elon Musk bought Twitter, people have been leaving the social networks like Twitter that used to be, less sort of right wing, for lack of a better term, and going to Blue Sky, which is more left wing. And then the right wingers who didn't used to go to Twitter because it seemed too lefty are now going to X. X is
Yep.
becoming a kind of parlor. Blue Sky is becoming more of a lefty, more lefty than I think Twitter ever was. And so now the social networks are like that. And now it's happening with the chatbots. And this is a
Right.
perfect example. Now, the disturbing thing to me is that you have this DeepSeek tool that basically has been exposed and outed as something that's obviously a mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist Party. And are
Correct.
you getting a sense that anybody cares
Well,
in terms of
no.
business? They're like, oh, it's cheap, this is great, and who cares if it's a mouthpiece of the Communist Party?
Okay. I don't think anybody cares, which is A, not surprising, and B, has some rationale to it. There are ways, especially because it's open source, you could, for example, what Perplexity said it's done is take away that censoring. So, like, what I saw in my testing is it could answer honestly about Taiwan, but then it, like you said, deletes it and says, we can't talk about it. Perplexity says, oh, we take away that censoring layer and it just answers. So it's kind of like this raw model, and then they just don't add on that creepy censoring tech over it. So there's a way to get around that. And then so Microsoft, though, with just data collection, and it's the same issue with TikTok, is like if you're using this platform, is the data going to the Chinese government, which of
Mm-hmm.
course you have heightened concerns about because you see it censoring questions
Right.
about the Chinese government. And Microsoft, they didn't mention that. They just said, oh, when you use it through Azure, it's safe and secure and businesses should feel comfortable. And they said they've done, quote, rigorous testing, which is kind of a joke because it came
Mm-hmm.
out on January 20th. So
Right.
that's kind of wild that they could even say that claim with no accountability to it. But
Yeah.
Amazon probably said the same thing. And, it's just one model within these kind of developer hubs that they can choose from. And when Perplexity adopts it, it's that too. You can choose DeepSeek, or you can choose Claude, or you can choose OpenAI's models. And so it's gotten the blessing of the tech world for sure.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, there's a lot more coming because, as I pointed out in my Machine Society piece, there's we're going to have chatbots coming from every direction, and if people are just choosing them because of the price, because of their capabilities, and not caring about the ideological underpinnings
Yep.
or where their data is going, then this is a huge incentive for everyone: China, Russia, you name it, Iran. Like, I'm predicting Islamic centric chatbots,
Yep.
Christian chatbots that
It's
embody the
kind of
values of the religion or
it's
whatever.
kind of like a dating app. Like you're gonna get,
Yeah, right. Yes.
Christian singles, like farmers only. That was a dating app for like
Yeah.
farmers who want to connect over that lifestyle. I mean, it's the same thing. It just becomes this
Yeah.
a business with its own marketing and yeah. I mean, the answers are very similar. And so another thing is just the features in the tool. Like, can it
Yeah.
export to your Gmail account? Can you one thing I had both of them create a table, and you couldn't directly copy and paste the table into Google Sheets or Excel. And so it's just a bunch of garbage when you copy and pasted it. It's like,
Mm.
okay, if there was a chat bot that I could copy and paste it or export it directly,
Yeah.
great. It's those little things. So the data is heavily commodified.
Yeah. And I think, I believed for a long time that where this is headed is glasses. So I think that as more people use smart glasses, they're going to have AI
Mm,
assistants that are chatting. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later in the podcast. But I really think that people will be choosing one or two or three chatbots based on whatever works best for their glasses. I think people will most likely not really care that much about the ideological underpinnings as long as it tells them
Yeah.
basic things, and gives them turn by turn directions and sets timers
Right.
and does trivial everyday things like that. But it's problematic, and I think we're going to be talking about that more and more over the next
Hmm.
couple of years.
I actually think we'll talk less about it because I think it'll just be part of the infrastructure. Like we don't talk about where our data is sent to. Does it go to a server in Russia? Does it go to a server in Texas? Like I think it's just this underlying infrastructure that it'll be disappointing, but I think we'll forget about it.
Yeah, it differs from cable TV though, in the sense that when somebody says something crazy on a right wing or a left wing uh, cable show, we all see it, and then
Hmm.
everybody, the other side mocks it and makes fun of it and see how those people are and all that kind of stuff. Whereas with chatbots, they're kind of private. They're kind of like TikTok. You don't know who's seeing what, and it'll be more difficult to cast light on what's actually happening in terms of ideological propaganda and sort of
Right.
narrative, crafting, because we'll all see different stuff. We'll all interact in different
Hmm.
ways. It'll be based increasingly on our own history with the chatbot. So it'll get more and more and more personal. And there won't
Right.
be any one thing that we can point to and say, look at that. It's like, this is Chinese commie propaganda, Maoist dreck, right? Because who knows what other people are seeing,
True.
and and so that'll be an interesting thing that we'll have to deal with. And I just hope that, I mean, I think if anything, TikTok has shown that people are happy and fine with a Chinese company choosing what they see, choosing a kind of view of the world, a view of the outside world, which is how a lot of people use TikTok, and have, even if they know that the Chinese Communist Party has a law that says that the government in China can intervene in that information flow anytime they
Hmm.
like, people shrug and be like, wow, but look at this and look at this next one and look at
Yeah.
this. And it's so addictive and so
Yep.
goes down so easy that I think that's demonstrated that nobody really care that much, like you say.
Right. Well, also TikTok isn't usually creepy like my experiments with DeepSeek. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm imagining a world where, well, in the infrastructure piece, like just if these models are open source and that's the future, I could imagine a generic interface. Let's say it's like a Google search
Right.
where you type in a question and behind the scenes it is selecting from 1,000 different chatbot models.
Yeah.
You don't know which one it's going to serve up the answer to, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that could be the future because they'll have different capabilities and different costs for that company that has the generic interface. So they will be calculating just like Uber, like, what's the right ride for you? And,
Right.
how do we get the most money? And um, it'll also just be like, depending on the complexity of the question, if you ask a really intense scientific or math logic question, it might
Yeah.
say, okay, calling on you, this model, that's time for you. Or if you ask a really simple question, like, how do you cook a pot roast, which I just did, it'll say
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, don't ask that expensive model. And in the back end, it'll say, ask that super cheap one. And
Hmm.
so
Yeah, because
that's
that's
right,
generic information that we can just be gotten
right,
from the cheap one
exactly.
just as well. This is how agentic AI works. And I don't know if this is technically agentic AI, but for those of you listening who are unfamiliar with the agentic AI concept, the idea is you have a basic central uh, agent, basically a chatbot, basically it's a LLM, and you have all these other LLMs that are kind of specialists. And the main LLM makes decisions about which of the specialist LLMs to bring into the equation. And it can like basically assign tasks to them, and they go off and do it in parallel with the other agents that are happening. And
Mm-hmm.
this is going to be a powerful thing in business, for automation, for all kinds of things. But what you're describing there is a kind of agentic AI system that uses informational chatbots and
Yep.
calling them into play as needed, and using the LLM, smarts basically to make
Mm-hmm.
that decision. I don't see why that wouldn't, and I also don't see why they wouldn't call that agentic AI. Um, it's
Well, I don't know. It's yeah, agentic is more like they fine tune the model for a specific thing, which
Hmm.
actually still fits in, let's say, customer service or
Hmm.
um, guitar teacher. They tune it, but in this case, it's almost like that automatically because even OpenAI says, this model is good for everyday use. This model is if you're doing deep scientific research. So
Hmm.
they already know that there are some that you should ask certain things to. And if you're not doing really intense stuff, you don't need a ChatGPT Plus account.
Right.
If you're just tinkering on your couch, so that's why I say they're already speaking like this, and so I could see a company that just becomes a shell, like a generic chat window, and
Yeah.
behind they're doing all this stuff to increase your experience while optimizing their costs, hopefully
Yeah.
saving you some money, but still
Yeah.
getting good answers. So that's probably already exists in the developer world, honestly.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about your interview with the CEO of Lucid, and I want to do that, but it probably makes sense for us to skip and then come back to that because
Sure.
the next thing is the holiday smart glasses, which is exactly along the lines of what we're talking about here, and then we'll do we'll talk about your interview, which I definitely want to hear about. Um,
Yeah, let's do it.
so Halliday smart glasses is one of the things that came out of CES. One of the many smart glasses products came out of CES. It's being kickstarted right now. It's about $500 or so, and they have a few innovations. So this is obviously a startup. It may or may not go somewhere. Probably won't go anywhere. But one of the innovations is instead of trying to beam something at the glasses for visuals, it
Hmm.
basically just projects it directly at the eye. So you kind of look up and you look
Wow.
right into the projector. And this is a cost saving thing. This makes it lighter. It makes you don't have to have such a sophisticated lens. You can just have a regular lens from your optometrist. And
But you have to have
there
an eyeball.
you have to have at least one eyeball. I think you
Yeah.
have to have a right eyeball. I think it's just on the right. I could be wrong
Okay,
about that.
got it. If you have a glass right eyeball, you're
Right.
out.
Lefty eyeball people, if you have an eye patch over your right eye, forget it. Look elsewhere. But one of the most interesting things that it has is what they call proactive AI. So, proactive AI is where it's listening and watching all the time, and it decides along the lines of an agentic AI model that decides things. Hey, the person you're talking to is lying their ass off. So I'm going to fact check this in real time. Or the person you're talking to is speaking Mandarin. So I'm going to give you English subtitles while you're talking
Hmm.
to them. And in fact, that part of it, so they weren't ready at CES to really talk about proactive AI, but they talked about the translation model. So it's a Chinese, I think it's a Hong Kong based company. A lot of American tech journalists were doing a demo with him where he was wearing glasses, they were wearing the glasses, he was speaking Mandarin, they were speaking English, and
Wow.
everybody got subtitles and they were actually having a conversation. Well, this is great. Google has demonstrated this in the labs. Everybody's been hinting at that sort of feature with the translation, but they're talking about a generic model that's always kind of listening, giving you information based on where you are, the time of day. And I am fascinated by this because I think it's clear that this is going to be the future of how we do glasses. Like someday, I don't know
Hmm.
when, this is how it's going to happen. Now, 10 years ago, if you remember, no, it's like what now? 13 years ago, Google Now came out. Remember Google Now before the Google Assistant? Google Now promised that they were going to do this kind of, proactive, stuff. And it was kind of like, it'd basically do stuff like, oh, I see that you're typing this, whatever. Do you want to put that in your calendar? And you're like, not really. It was just kind of like it didn't set the world on fire. They just kind of folded
Yep.
into Assistant. They de-emphasized that kind of proactive stuff, and it was really a nothing burger. But what they're talking about is something that is something burger. And I don't know.
Hmm.
Do you find glasses that are listening all the time and watching everything and then whispering in your ear like little things you ought to know creepy, or is that like super powerful?
Both. But I agree with you that it's going somewhere, and I think the biggest two reasons why. One, so there's the Meta Ray-Ban glasses that have really high sales, so they've
Yeah,
already figured out how to a way to bring this to market. So it's not
yeah,
like the Apple Vision Pro, which was incredible technology that like no one could figure out how to integrate into their life, or very few people.
yeah.
But these glasses seem to be something people like, and
Yes.
I had an exposure to it where I went to this event with Ford it was a racetrack in New York, and they had professional stunt drivers there, like the people in the commercials who,
Hmm.
when at the bottom it says like "Don't try this at home."
Right.
So like the person in the car was driving us, and it was horrifying,
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
be honest.
Terrifying. Yeah.
It was terrifying. I really dissociated, but I wanted to film it for social media, and I couldn't. Like my brain jumped out the window. I was doing donuts. We were in an
Hmm.
EV. It was just really intense. I had a helmet on and a harness,
Yeah.
and so I couldn't hold the phone. But when we got out, and this other journalist calls me over, and he goes, "Hey, check this out." He was wearing the glasses, and
Yeah.
he was able to just do exactly what I did, but he had the video and I didn't.
Yes.
And I was like, oh man, that is really good. Like,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah. They're great. I have them and I will use them, and I
Oh,
use them in all
really?
kinds of, yeah. I mean, I they got stolen, and then there was a big chunk of
Oh,
time when I didn't have them, and I just got them back because it's a long story, but I'm using them again, and I have used them in the past, and they're pretty great for that sort of thing.
what do you use it
Uh,
for?
well, we go to all kinds of crazy places like the Central Market in Oaxaca, which is loud and cacophonous and crazy. There's like meat hanging everywhere. It's like a really
I've been
interesting,
there.
fascinating place in
Yeah.
Oaxaca. So you know what I'm
Yep.
talking about, right?
Yeah. It was
So
very hot when I was there as well.
yeah, yeah, but it's like
Yeah.
light beaming in. It's visually very stunning. There's like people selling
Mm-hmm.
everything, and so I've done a lot of recording of that. I've used
Cool.
the Meta AI where you say, "Hey Meta," and you ask it a question, and it tells you. I've also
Yeah.
used other chatbots on my phone, and the audio it just basically functions like AirPods or something.
Yeah.
Uh, whatever audio is happening on your phone, it'll do that too. So they're
Cool.
great. I mean, they're great for very quickly taking a picture. And I was a glass hole back in the day too. So
Wait, a glass hole?
a glass hole, Google Glass user,
Oh.
and a devoted one. And so that had a similar functionality, except you look like a complete idiot with those things on. And I was looking like said idiot. My wife and I are living in Florence, and so there's always
Wow.
stuff happening in Florence, and I'd be like, click, click, or take a you could. It would take a picture of you winked, so I'm like winking, and then like gruff Italian policemen were getting concerned, and anyway, it was fantastic, and the photos are that first person view for
Yeah.
photography is incredible. It's a really,
Cool.
really great. So I use them. I really like them. I really get it. I'm looking forward to the version that they're talking about now, where you also have a visual layer. But I find it hilarious personally that Mark Zuckerberg was super invested in his metaverse concept, which is really about VR mainly. They gave lip service to AR and other things like that, but it's mostly VR. And he's given all this lip service to all these chatbots we talked about in the last episode,
Hmm.
where people can create fake people to exist on social networks that other people, the real people, interact with the fake people and all that stuff. He's super excited about that. And then the Ray-Ban Meta glasses was kind of like a side hustle that they didn't really care about. And that's the one that's succeeding. That's the one
Right.
that's really dominating the market, beating Apple by a couple, 3 years, uh,
Beating everyone.
beating everyone. And they're kind of like, I don't get it. People want to live in the real world and still have data. I don't understand.
Yeah, why aren't
So
they pushing that more? Like to this day, they don't push it, but it's they're totally ahead of everyone. They have a toehold in the market and they have a clear runway to just dominate it. So why isn't Mark Zuckerberg going on Joe Rogan and talking about that?
yeah, I know. I
It's so
mean,
weird.
one guess that I have made in public on my newsletter is that they lose money on every
Yeah.
pair because they're super inexpensive. I mean, the
Hmm.
reason they're so much better than the original version, which were called what, Ray-Ban something or other. I don't know. They
Yeah.
had a previous version that was kind of is that the
Yeah.
microphones and the speakers and the camera are all really high quality, and this really changed the entire relationship that users had with this
Mm-hmm.
product, because it was just the sound was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
The pictures you got and videos were really good. I mean, they're not as good as a smartphone, but almost like
Yeah.
they're as good as a smartphone was like 3 or 4 years ago. It's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it's got to be costing them a fortune, all those electronics. And they sell it for like 250, or what is it,
Yeah,
350, 250, something like that. It was really
right.
inexpensive. It's way too
I mean,
inexpensive.
it's got to be, but I think if you look at their wider portfolio, it could be the best investment they ever made because it actually gives purpose to their whole AI investment, which is also burning a hole through everyone's pockets and the planet. So I mean, at least it could give a vision to it. Whereas like last time I ranted about their thing they're pushing is open source AI for all. Like that's their big
Yeah.
push, open
Yep.
source, but it's so tone deaf because you really need a lot of skills to tap into these models. And if you're not a software engineer of a specific type with specific hardware, it just washes right over you. It doesn't apply to
Yep.
you at all. But the glasses
Yeah.
are so relatable, and if they can say, oh, what we're doing with AI we can put in the glasses and we'll start a revolution, like
Yes.
they're talking, but they're really missing on their messaging in so many ways. And Zuckerberg is a whole can of worms.
You're exactly right about all of that. And I think that this whole metaverse thing, which I've always opposed, it's,
Yeah, it was always uncomfortable, just weird.
yeah, but he should be calling this the metaverse. This is the metaverse. This is part of the metaverse.
Right.
And, this whole thing about talking to artificial people, this is the opportunity to do that. So I've actually done that on my own. So there's a chatbot called Pi. Have you used Pi?
No.
Pi. So there's a chatbot called Pi. Nobody can stand it for more than 2 minutes or something like that because it's like a pretty good chatbot. It's not great. It's not as good as Perplexity or ChatGPT in terms of its intelligence, but the voice is super real. And I choose. They have like 9 voices to choose from. I choose number 4, which is like a woman with a California accent, vocal fry,
All
the
right, you
whole
got to do
bit.
it. You got to do it.
You want me to imitate the voice now?
Yeah, of course.
She's like,
Yeah. If you're
okay,
going to
so
bring
here's
it
a tip.
up.
Here's an interaction. I'll be like, so what's the population of Mexico City? And it's like, oh, that's a great question, Mike. Oh my God, well, let me tell you. It's like very kind of like super conversational. The different voices are different types of people, but they're all super conversational and chatty. And they
Right.
typically will give you all this information you asked for, give you information you didn't ask for, and then ask you a question. So how do you like Mexico City? Oh, I like it just fine. Well, that's fantastic. And so but it asks you questions back. And I don't know if it's still the case, but through the app, it would just sit there for hours waiting for you to talk
Mm-hmm.
with an open mic, basically.
Hmm.
And so I had this running through the Ray-Ban Meta glasses while I was walking around different cities, including Mexico City. And I'd see
Wow.
something and I'd be like, what does blah, blah, blah mean in English? The Spanish word so-and-so mean in English. Oh, Mike, great question, blah, blah, blah. And then
Okay,
I just,
that's a problem I have. Like it's just gassing you up. Like it's just telling you
yes,
you're so smart and you're like, "Oh, this girl from California is the best. I want to talk to her on all my vacations." And then
yeah,
it's a slippery slope and now what are we doing?
exactly. Well, I mean, it's super irritating. This is why I don't think anybody uses it because at first you're like, wow, this is really amazing. And after a while you're like,
Yeah.
I just want this person to go away because they're just really getting on my nerves. But
It's like AI
you,
in general.
you want something in between that and like a regular chatbot that's more down to business. But
Yeah.
my point is that if it would back off on the chattiness a bit and stop
Yeah.
grilling me with questions, I don't really want it to ask me questions.
Oh, I thought you liked the questions. Okay.
At first, it was interesting to have a back and forth, right?
It's a interesting like phenomenon. You're kind of like, oh
Yes, it
wow,
was novel.
it can lob it back to me, and you're like, oh wow, okay, I'll keep talking, and that's a crazy experience. But yeah, it sounds like it gets annoying.
It does, and it's like I don't want to answer any more questions. I just want you to
Yeah.
answer my questions. And anyway, so my point is, but for Facebook doesn't seem to recognize that Meta AI should work a little bit more like that. Like not that much like
Yeah.
that, but a little bit more like that. And now all of a sudden I'm interacting with a virtual character. Meta AI is just, it's like a search engine that's audible, right? But
Right.
they could turn that into a bit of a person. And I think given the glasses, that's something because nobody wants to use their other tools that are online where, it's a fake person. But that's
Mm-hmm.
something where that's how they could get people to talk to a fake person.
Mm-hmm.
I hope they don't.
If it's useful, yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, and also, I mean, the whole thing. So the Meta Ray-Ban glasses are a lot like Google Glass. You have to explicitly prompt it. Then you say what you're going to say, and it says back what it says back, and that's it. And
Right.
they could tweak it to make it more like, and give you some options, like always be listening, because years ago, many years ago, there was a product that somebody in Silicon Valley came out. It was a startup. Some big company bought it and killed it, but it was like this startup where it was like an iPad app, and you put your iPad in front of you and you have a conversation with somebody, and it would take what it heard and it would just run Google searches. And this thing was a stream
Wow.
of information related to what you're talking about. And, more often than not, it would give you some ammo for the conversation you're having. It would give you
Hmm.
facts and, information. And I thought, this is really interesting. Somebody bought it. I don't remember who. They killed it. But that always made me think there's, when AI gets better, we can have help with what we're doing.
Right.
Like, for example, we're doing a podcast right now, right? And I'm wearing headphones. There's something that can go, electronics can go into my ear. And let's say I'm struggling to remember the name of the company that bought that
Yep.
tool and what was the name of the tool. I'd love a little, like, somebody whisper in my ear what the name of the tool was and what the company who bought it and what year it was as I'm
Right.
talking to you.
Right. Right.
That'd be kind of cool. Like, I think people
That
could
would
use
be
something like
cool.
that.
When Google first became very accessible on people's phones, I was a bit of a curmudgeon about it because I liked the experience of being in a group of people and you're like, oh, what is that thing? And then no one knows what it is. And so everyone starts coming out with theories and now the conversation goes in a different direction. And as soon as someone pulled their phone out and Googled it, it was just like, over. We'd have the
Yeah.
answer, move on.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you're totally right that everyone just wants to know the answer. And clearly that model has won out, but
Yeah.
there is something lost, I think, in the constant, always on information availability.
I remember the days where it's like, what was that actress who was in that movie? Well, I guess we'll never know. It's unknowable. We just have to live with our ignorance. And then you move on to another topic. That was,
Yeah.
there was something to that. And then 3 weeks later, you're like, that's who it was. Meg Ryan.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's not the best experience, but it is it can be fun with the right group of people if it can lead you in different directions and you don't really need to know the actress's name. You're just there to
At
talk
the
to
end of the day,
people.
it's more important that you're paying attention to other people and not like,
Right.
oh, hang on.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a
Right.
quick research project. I'm going to ignore you for a minute, and then I'm going to be back with
Yep.
you in a second. And then the whole
Yep.
conversation is kind of interrupted.
Because they've done studies that most people feel insulted or neglected when the person that they're with looks at their phone.
Yeah.
And so you could apply that to glasses, and I wonder what emotion that would create in the person you're with.
Yeah. If you're moving your eyes because you're reading
Yeah.
as somebody's talking to you.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you feel insulted that they're doing that? I
I
mean, they're
think you
definitely
would.
out. I think you would. I think you might be unsure what they're looking at and what the
Right.
glasses served up and how that's affecting what they bring to the conversation, right?
Yeah. Right. I mean, yeah,
Never thought about it.
they could be on TikTok while you're pouring your guts out.
Yeah, I'm sure their teenagers will be.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Or to my cousin's husband who was watching football at the table at my wedding. He would on his
Really?
phone. Yeah, he would be doing that in his glasses. And I'd be like, "Oh, look at you participating in my event," and actually, he'd be watching football.
During the ceremony or the reception?
Reception, probably ceremony. I wouldn't put it past
Yeah.
him, but
See, with glasses, it would have been
it would have been at the
nonstop football.
ceremony,
Yeah.
nonstop football, and no one. I guess no one would know, right?
You know, wait till the groom is wearing the glasses during the ceremonies.
Oh,
Uh, reading the vows, and then all of a sudden the battery
yeah.
dies, and it's like, and then a bunch of other things. Anyway, your turn. Go. You do the vows. Yeah, it's going to be bad.
Yeah, I've never thought about any of that till now, but I really think it's probably coming.
It's coming for sure.
All right. Lucid interview?
Yeah, you talked to the
EVs are
CEO of
done with
Lucid.
AI? Yep. It
Yeah,
did.
I've had it with AI for now.
I know it's like we have to talk about it, but
We
it's
have to.
there's a level of apathy. It's just like, ah man, this is crazy.
Yeah.
But EVs I feel good about. I think electric cars are an
Yep.
interesting product. They're very fun. Um,
Yep.
and they are very controversial, which is also fun for reporting. Not for the environment, but for reporting. Um, so yeah, I interviewed the CEO of Lucid. They reached out to me, and usually when you talk to these guys, they're all always guys except for Mary Barra at GM. They're very media trained, and they have their PR person with them. But this Lucid CEO was super chill. His PR person was with him, and he gave a very honest interview in which he told the story with a very lively British accent that he has. His name is Peter Rawlinson. We were talking about supercharging, and he was like, when I worked at Tesla as the chief engineer of the Model S, which is Tesla's first mass market car,
Right.
2012 came out. He was like, let me tell you why Tesla put the charge port where it did. So
Okay.
anyway, Lucid's the next brand to get supercharging access. And a big thing with that is that now that other cars are using the Tesla stations, some of them are blocking multiple spots to use the supercharger because the port is a different location.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's happening. That's something Tesla has acknowledged and put out official materials that say, hey, try not to block spots, but if you do, here's the best way to do it.
Wow. Okay.
So that's a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm talking to him about just the whole charging bit in Tesla. And so when he used to work there, he used to report to Elon Musk. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, this was in the early days, and Peter Rawlinson developed a whole methodology about where they should put the charge port because that affects how the car positions to the charger. And he suggested not the front where the Nissan Leaf has it, right, which is right on the nose, because he said
Yeah.
if you get an fender bender, it could damage the port, and now you can't open it, you can't charge. So he was
Mm.
like, I recommend just another spot on the front, maybe near the door or above the wheel. So most Americans drive by just pulling into the spot, and then they'll just pull in, charger will be there, they'll plug in. And Elon Musk said, no, because the rental property he was currently in Bel Air had a setup that was appropriate for the charge port to be in the rear. Just the setup of his garage, he would trip over the cord if it was plugged in up front. So he said, nope, we're not doing it.
So
And
pure egoism, just narcissism.
yep, no engineering rationale, no
Wow.
customer data, no research, no nothing. Just, I think it should be in the back. And now, to this day, every single Tesla driver has to back in to use a supercharger.
Hmm.
And so that's just been something I think people try to rationalize, like, oh, it's better for this and that reason. But it is not better unless you like backing into spots, which most people don't like to do.
Right.
So that one decision has millions of people all over the world backing into spots for just the whims of
And
Elon Musk.
probably, for every 10,000 people who back in, one or two or three will crash into the charging
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
So there's I only ever charged my Toyota plug-in hybrid in two places. One is at my son's house, just from his garage, and the other one down the street. There's a strip mall, and there's a Starbucks
Hmm.
in a strip mall, and there are two free charging stations for electric cars, and they're supported by billboards. So I like to go
Hmm.
there, park, plug it in, use the Starbucks,
Yep.
and fill it up for free, basically. And that thing has a cable that's like, it doesn't matter where the charging port is because the cable
Yeah.
is like 20 feet long. So the superchargers don't have that, or they can't do
No,
that.
they have a short cable. The whole system's optimized just to work with Teslas, and Tesla is putting out their next generation version of superchargers, which have longer cables. But what another thing the Lucid CEO said was just that the current supercharger network is actually quite outdated in certain ways, like the amount of energy it can expense, things like this with the cord. Um, so people are adopting that as a standard port for reliability, for accessibility, not for technical advantages.
A couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, Tesla demonstrated a robotic plug that found the hole and plugged in and just did it with hands free. Is
Yeah.
that are there any superchargers that have that?
No.
That's not real
Um,
yet.
No, it's more in China. There's a brand Neo, which has something cool where have you heard of this?
No.
So it's called battery swapping. You pull the
Yeah.
car into a station, a robotic arm senses the car, goes under the car, takes the battery out of the car, the full battery, then pulls a fresh, fully charged one from a storage rack of other batteries that fit in the car and installs a fresh battery and you're out in 5 minutes. So that's the closest we have to robotic
That
charging.
makes a lot of sense, but those batteries are huge. I mean, the Tesla batteries are
Yeah.
probably bigger than the ones in those cars, right? I would guess. I mean, the Tesla batteries are
Mm, might be similar.
enormous.
I mean, Tesla gets a lot of its battery tech from China,
But
so
and it doesn't matter. They're not set up to
yeah,
be swapped anyway. So
they're
you
not
could
set
not
up.
do that with an
Yeah,
existing Tesla, I
right.
imagine.
There
Wow.
are some I've seen wireless charging could work that way where
Hmm.
it also goes under the car where you could go into a parking garage, let's say,
Hmm.
and it senses like, hey, a new car is here. And then a little Roomba type thing
Yeah.
scurries over to your car, sits
Right.
under it and starts charging you. That's coming.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's the, the the whole charging thing is an issue, and I love my Prius Prime because it's a gas car. If it's
Mm-hmm.
a hybrid gas car. If I don't have time to charge or I can't find a charge or whatever, and I just don't ever think about it. And sometimes I charge it. There are two other downsides. One of which is that if you do fully charge it, it gives you 24 miles only
Yeah.
on
Yep.
electric. Then it kicks over to the hybrid system. And the other one is in order to have that capability, it raises the already minimal trunk space by about 4 inches. And so the amount of storage
Mm,
space to put stuff in because of the battery is much more limited than a regular
got it.
Prius. And that is annoying. However, I don't have young kids. My kids are grown up, so I don't, have to schlep around bicycles and all the stuff that parents have to
Mm-hmm.
do. And so it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
Um, but yeah. Anyway, we'll see. We'll see where it's going, and I think we're into a new era where we're
Yes.
figuring all this stuff out. You're seeing all kinds of cars. They're always concept cars, never really on the market, where they're sort of covered in solar panels, which gives you an
Yeah.
extra 20 miles or something. Gives you no way you could keep it charged
Right.
through solar panels, but we're getting there. That's kind of a cool idea. Um, we'll see. We'll see if anybody
We'll
really.
see.
Yeah.
Aptera, there's a company called Aptera that always comes to CES and all the shows, and they're the big name in solar powered
Yeah.
EVs.
Okay.
Yeah, but to the new era and the new administration. So the big thing that's on the horizon is Trump going to get rid of the federal tax credit for EVs? So he's already done some things. He came into office saying, I'm going to end EVs on day one.
Right.
And what he did on day one was he removed the revised EPA emission standards. So the EPA um, tells car companies set standards. You can only have this much emissions from your whole fleet. So that to
Yeah.
meet those goals, they have to develop I think it was something like 30% EVs, and that could also include hybrids. So it really was somewhat feasible. And I think the auto companies were like, yeah, we can work on that.
Yeah.
So that was good, and that was on the way, and now it's gone. So he got rid of that. There's no emissions incentive for car companies to do that anymore.
I gotta think that it's not going to make a dent in what car companies do because they have to. It's such a long process to design and build and
Yeah,
deploy a new line of cars, and they know Trump's going to be gone. They know that the general direction of regulations is toward more energy efficient uh, systems. They know California is not going to go along with that unless, there's probably going to be a big war between California and the
Yep.
Trump administration about this stuff. But if California,
Yeah.
which has a population larger than Canada and a GDP larger than Italy, uh, chooses to have strict emissions standards, that's going to be the standard for the U.S.
Yep.
And so that's been a long-standing contentious. But what I'm a contentious issue. But what I'm curious about is, what does Elon Musk think about this? About
Yeah.
Trump basically disincentivizing electric vehicles.
So he's happy about it because his business is scaled to a point where he no longer needs as much government support. So things like loans, grants, standards. Um, he thinks it will cripple his rivals while making him re-emerge as the super super dominant player. So Tesla, it's received hundreds of millions of dollars from the Department of Energy in its early days. That
Yeah,
Lucid guy told me about when they went to the DOE and got a $465 million loan in 2010. So they've had tons of government funding, also up to this day with the charger funding that's gone out. And it has really served them. And at one point, Tesla really was like 80% of all EVs on the road. They're now
yeah,
at 50. Other car companies
right.
are scaling up. They do not have any launches planned for this year. Other companies do. And so they're excited about the prospect of cutting down and crippling people who still need tax incentives
Right.
and they still need government support because it will put Tesla back on top. And that is what Musk has said publicly.
So, in a nutshell, Tesla exists because of a taxpayer funded ladder.
Yeah.
And Elon Musk is happy to pull that ladder up now that he's
Yeah.
on top and
It's a
where
good
he
way to put
is,
it.
and to harm rivals. This is similar to a lot of the social networks and other companies in Silicon Valley that call for regulations to regulate their industry. And the reason they do that is because they're very expensive to implement. And what they're
Mm-hmm.
concerned about is startups. So if there's something costs $1 billion to implement, they can that's just lunch money for Meta.
Right.
But for a startup that would come and compete against Meta, that's a deal breaker right from the start. So this is one of the reasons why big companies want to be regulated, because they want a barrier to entry for less
Right.
well-funded companies.
Right. And I have a little edge in my voice when I talk about this because I get frustrated when I publish pieces that e- Elon doesn't support federal incentives for EVs. He's changing his focus to other areas, and people are like, "This is such leftist BS." And I'm like, "No, I've listened to earnings calls for years. I have heard these quotes. I have quoted him. I have looked through all his tweets, and I published something about how Trump was attacking EVs, and people are like, wow, this is left propaganda. And I'm like, no, he literally campaigned saying all EV drivers can rot in hell. I will end the EV mandate. I will
Yeah.
stop EVs. Like, people, the misinformation on this subject is truly wild and out of control. And so when I'm asked about it, that's why I make a point to say, like, this is not my opinion. This is
Right.
what they are saying, and I'm telling you what they said.
And this is back to what we were talking about before, where sources of information are all politically divided. And so you can't even say, check your favorite, chatbot,
Ugh,
because your AI chatbot is going to omit the facts that disagree with your worldview or your opinion and so
right.
on. So it's a sad state of affairs. And
It is. It
yeah,
is. You're giving me fresh rage.
yeah. So I asked you earlier about what do you want to block this week, and you said
I,
SoftBank wanting to invest $25 billion in OpenAI. So can you tell me about that? I
yep.
haven't seen that news.
Yeah, I said, I'd be happy to block this $25 billion investment in OpenAI. SoftBank, of course, was listed on that Stargate announcement as the main funder. I think OpenAI is getting way too much money. I'm surprised people think it's going to have such a high return on investment given the
Yeah,
commodification of data, like I talked about.
right.
And I just think they need to just take a back seat and just stop. And so that's on my block list.
All right. Let's block $25 billion coming from SoftBank to OpenAI.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a good idea. The weird thing about OpenAI is that they were the first to take all this research that's been happening in labs forever and to make it publicly available. And as a result of that, they're the only AI company that's essentially a household name. They
Yeah,
are the brand and the
true.
face of the generative AI movement, trend, whatever you want to call it. And that's why they get so much money. That's why people want to invest in them. It's not their technology. Their technology is amazing, but it's not that amazing. I mean, it's not
Yeah,
$25 billion more amazing. So, yeah, I think it's
right. It's also a weird
block
week.
worthy.
Yeah, it's also a weird week for SoftBank to say like, "Oh
Yeah,
wow, let's give them more money after the whole DeepSeek thing," which is
yeah,
basically replicating their tech. So
yep,
I don't know if SoftBank is just not as educated on this subject or what. That's just a very strange move. You don't need to invest $25 billion more in OpenAI. This is also not part of the Stargate thing.
right. And I think they just kind of see it almost. They spend money the way lobbyists spend money. It was like, let's fund both
Yeah.
sides, and one of them will pay off.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a
Right.
mystery.
Fresh rage, I'm telling you, at the end of this week.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, Emily, let's before you wrap it up, I want to just basically point out how fun this has been so far, and I'm really enjoying this podcast. We are building up our podcast infrastructure. This is a startup, so we're going to be we're ending up on all the social networks. We have a Substack that we're working on. Lots of fun stuff, and so stay tuned. We'll be sharing all that in future episodes. But so far, this has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. I think also like we saw even just on this episode, like we're teasing out new ideas in real time.
Yep.
And it's just fun. You're such a good person to talk through this stuff with. So
And
I'm
likewise.
yeah.
And I really appreciate doing this with you. So thank you for
All
that.
right. Well, you've made it through another episode of the Unicorn Roast podcast with Mike Elgin and Emily Forlini. This podcast has no paywall, no ads, and no sponsors. All we ask is a 5-star rating and a glowing review. Follow us, subscribe, and get links and show notes at our website, unicornroast.com. We will see you next week.
All right. See you next week.